Hi everybody. Welcome to our webinar on return on investment through better community engagement. We're just waiting for various people to join. So if you've got any ideas or questions over the next couple of minutes before we start, please do just tap them into the message window that you can see hopefully in front of you, and we'll take those throughout the session. We'll start in a couple of minutes. So hopefully you can see some slides in front of you. And if you have any problems, message or send an email. There's an email address at the bottom of the slide here. So we're going to talk about some of the issues around return on investment for community engagement for about 25 minutes or so. Please ask questions as you go. If we can't take them immediately, we will definitely take them at the end. And we want it to be as interactive as possible as we go. We're going to introduce ourselves. We're going to talk about why this subject is important. We've got Martin, who's going to tell you a bit about himself in a sec. He's going to talk about the developer's perspective on this. And then because of who we are as Commonplace, we're going to talk a little bit about digital tools and how they can help in this whole area of return on investment. We'll take some questions, and then for those who want to, we will do a slightly more in-depth demo of the Commonplace platform. So to introduce us, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Mike. I'm the co-founder of Commonplace, and I'm going to tell you a bit more about Commonplace as we go.
Hello everybody, I'm Martin Evans. I'm a property developer. I'm a non-executive director of Commonplace, and I took that position because in all of the years that I've spent working in property development, predominantly in regeneration development, community engagement has been a very large part of what has delivered success in this kind of schemes that I've worked on. So it's a subject that I'm very close to my heart, and I think later on we'll get a chance to pick that apart a little bit more.
So why did we decide to talk about return on investment for community engagement? And I guess why do you do community engagement at all? So our experience has been that quite often community engagement is done as a checkbox exercise. It's done as a bit of annoyance, actually, and it's just something you have to get through. And I don't think I'm sure that many of you don't think that, and certainly we don't think that. But I think broadly within the sector there is that kind of thought. And that's, in fact, we believe passionately that community engagement can be the opposite. It can be an extremely valuable source of return for organisations, both in the public and private sector. And that's important because if you can identify and potentially measure the return on investment for community engagement, then it's possible to create a much stronger business case for investing in it. And that means that potentially you can get more investment, which means you can get more benefit. So there's a kind of positive feedback loop to this whole process. So we're keen to engage in the conversation about how we can measure it, how we can understand it better, so that we can ultimately create more and better investment that creates more value. I'm now going to hand over to Martin to talk about his experience of how this works.
Thanks, Mike. So I think that community engagement and listening to what people say is really at heart a casualty of the combative process that is property development. When you're a property developer and you are seeking planning consent to build in a borough or in a town, the process right from the start with planners is a combative one. It's about a negotiation that oftentimes becomes a fight between planners on one side of the table and developers on the other side of the table. And so everything that characterizes that relationship is about what you must do in order to get your planning consent. And you just get entrenched in that whole process, and it stops you imagining that some of those tools that you have to employ to secure your planning consent are tools that could be incredibly useful if looked at in a very different, more positive way than just a box-ticking exercise, as Mike said. I think that across our country, this is driven in large part by the problem that we're all facing in our industry at the minute, which is our housing crisis. And how our housing crisis impacts on this is very simple. We're not building enough. And because we're not building enough, it means that demand is constantly outstripping supply. When that happens, it means that those that build have to try less hard than they might otherwise do if it was the other way around and supply was outstripping demand. So I like to think about it in terms of other consumer products, because that's what housing is. Whatever tenure, whatever type of housing you build, it's a consumer product. Imagine Samsung or Apple or BMW launching a product where they don't do any market research. They just assume that the product that they build is the product that people want to buy. That sounds crazy, but that's how it works in our industry. Most everything that we build in terms of housing sells. And so there is a culture, particularly in private sector property development, that you don't have to try very hard, that whatever you build will sell. You do it a lot, you've been doing it for years, and therefore you know and understand what it is that you need to build. And I find that extraordinary, particularly because when people buy a flat or rent a flat, it becomes the largest consumer product they will ever buy, or certainly the largest amount of money going out of their bank account every month if they are renting. And so how can that possibly be, that in that kind of marketplace we don't have the most sophisticated market research processes that allow us to understand what it is that people really want? There's another sub-issue to that, which is that I'm not sure that people know what they want. And when the market is just in a situation of delivery, I used to work at CABE, and we spent quite a lot of time at CABE worrying about how we encourage volume house builders to build better designed product. And it became clear to us after a while that with limited public sector resources, it just stopped working, bashing developers or trying to inspire developers to build better. And in fact, what we had to do was go the other end of the market and encourage consumers to understand better about what made good product. That just became such an enormous job to do, because when you imagine how many people there are in the market to buy or rent homes, all of us, then no amount of money in the world could develop a marketing campaign that would allow that to be better. And so our industry is at its heart, the infrastructure and the way that our industry works, it offers us a problem in these terms. But things are getting better and things are changing. And I would say that that problem in our industry is also then matched on the other side by a change in people's feelings about the places that they live. So you only have to pick up newspapers these days to understand that the politics around places where people live are becoming a very different beast than it was even 5 years ago. If you think right across the piece, from estate regeneration to the places that private sector developers are building, people in communities are much more interested and much more vocal about the places where they live. Much more interested and vocal about how much it costs to live in those places, about the services and amenities that there are in those places, and about their relationship with local authority and the planning regulators. And so at the heart of our industry, there appears to me to be a divergence of interest, that we in the development community are not really listening enough and understanding that there is this great shift in public opinion that is happening. It's at an acute end of the market at the minute, but I think it's inevitable that it's only going to get more widespread. And so those of us in our industry who are smart need to recognize this and understand how we can adapt our working patterns to recognize and understand it. Our industry is changing, though, and it's changing for the good. It says on the slide up there about the growth in the PRS sector. That, for me, is a very interesting change in our industry. It's driven two ways. One, because people are less able to raise deposits and get mortgages to buy, and so the market for rentals is increasing. But also it seems that we are changing our attitude to the places that we live. We're becoming much more European in our attitude, and certainly as ownership continues to drop year on year in recent years. What that means is a big change in the way that money invests in housing development. When the big money is interested in long-term returns, and that's what PRS offers, long-term returns from people paying their rents, then that big money that's investing in that property has a very different interest in the people who are living in the homes that they fund to build, rather than those who are funding build to sell, which is a very short-term investment that then just moves on as returns are delivered in the short to medium term. I think we've a little way to go yet, But when pension funds and big institutional investors are becoming more and more interested in the people who are delivering the returns, i.e. the renters in the thousands of flats that are being planned and built, then they're going to understand that it is in their interest to make those people happy, because happy people stay in flats a long time, they renew their rental agreements, they complain less when rents go up, and so there are fewer voids and lower changeover costs. What makes people happy? Nice places to live, good properties and good environments and good surrounding places. So inherent in the way that money is moving in our industry is a good thing in terms of this. All of that, of course, means greater ability to communicate with the people who live in the places that we build. And so an opportunity and a responsibility. And that really is, for me, all about the third point on this slide, which is about placemaking. How do we ensure that we make good places, not just because it's our responsibility to do that, but because it's good business? And understanding how to make good places to deliver good business for ourselves and for our investors means understanding those people for whom we are building. You can't understand them unless you ask them. The Deptford project is a project that I worked on over the last 8 years. Really, it was a project that we won just before the recession, and so it went on a bit of go slow over the recession. But it benefited from that, actually. I think our investors' bank balance didn't necessarily benefit from that period, but the development did. It's on Deptford High Street in South East London. It's the old railway yard that is attached to Deptford High Street Station. Deptford High Street Station was redeveloped by Network Rail in 2012 as a response to the large amount of regenerative development that was going on in the town centre. The railway yard next to the station was put up as a development opportunity by the local authority that owned it, and my company, Cathedral Group, bought it. It was not a very nice place. Deptford High Street is a high street in South East London that has its challenges, and this piece of land tucked slightly behind it next to the train station was really not very nice. And so we needed to understand how we could make transformational change in that place. Now, typically, developers want to spend very little money at that point of acquisition of land, simply because it's highest risk time when your money is at greatest risk. And so what is usually inevitable in those situations is that you put a hoarding up around a site, you hire a security guard and a dog, and you keep people out. But of course, in a place where you are creating transformational change and needing to do that with as little risk as possible, my view is that you have to talk to as many people as possible. So quite the opposite as a place like this, rather than shut it up and hoard it, I wanted to open it and let people in. And so that picture that you see there is an old train carriage that we bought and parked up on the site and turned into a cafe. It sat there for 5 years. You can't see in that picture, but just around the corner, all the way running down the entire length of the site is a series of railway arches. And alongside putting that train carriage in there and opening it up as a coffee shop, we cleared out the arches, made them good, and let them for very, very low rent to a collection of local creative businesses, who then came immediately and created a place there. Some of those businesses that we then had to move out during construction phase have returned in the permanent scheme, having established their businesses and then taken them temporarily elsewhere as we built. Having that 5-year period to engage with the local community there meant that we were able to talk to as many people as possible. So the staff who worked in the cafe, the people who ran the businesses, were all trained to be our community consultation consultants, if you like. And so we had a constant feedback flow of information. And really, all that did for us was just enrich our ability to understand the place where we were going to build. And so the scheme that we built in the end, that has just completed last month, was hugely enriched and much better for that long and involved public consultation in that project.
Brilliant, Martin, thank you. So, as Martin has outlined, understanding people is essential to making them happy. We know that from every other form of product delivery, and indeed from work in this area as well. And happy people ultimately means good business, and I think that that's true whether it's in the private sector or the public sector. So what we're now going to talk through is 4 areas where we have seen the ability to improve return on investment as a result of community engagement. And I'm talking about this particularly from a perspective of using digital tools, but actually I think the approaches are are common whether you're using digital tools or whether you're doing it face-to-face or in other more traditional ways. So we're going to talk about crowdsourcing opinion. That basically just means gathering lots of data about what people need, and how that more data and better data can help make better decisions. We're going to talk about the process of planning a little bit and some experiences we've had of improving the planning process, reducing costs, reducing risks, and so on. We're going to talk about how it can help capture social need and use that to drive changes which create better places to live. And right back to what Martin was saying, the opportunity in all of this is to create a brand which really improves the way that the place works, but also improves your ability as a business to get value from that. So the first area I wanted to talk about is crowdsourcing opinion, and I've got some kind of mini case studies just to illustrate how we have done this. And the one I chose for crowdsourcing opinion was something called Bristol Bugbears. It's a Commonplace installation in Bristol for Bristol City Council. And the problem that we're solving was that they have, within Bristol City Council, a limited amount of money to invest in the cycling and pedestrian infrastructure of the city. And rather than do what they previously have done, which was to make a series of strategic decisions within the council based on very limited data about where to spend this money and what improvements to try and make. They really wanted to understand from the people who are using the infrastructure where they thought the challenges were, and where they thought the investment should be made, and indeed what they thought the investment should be used for. So we used the Commonplace needs heat map, and we have got over 7,800, I think it's actually over 8,000 data points from that. And this has created a significant data set, which is a couple of orders of magnitude larger than they would otherwise have had in order to help them make this decision. So some of the things that we have found, and they have found from the process, which feed directly into the return on investment argument, is that the decisions that they have been able to make have been supported quite strongly by the data that they've collected. One of the things that we asked people when they added the comments to the heat map was to not only identify where and what the problems were, but actually to say whether they thought that it should be something that's added, something that was removed, or something that was fixed. And as you can see from the chart from the dashboard, the majority of people thought that they could actually get best return on the investment for them by fixing what was already there rather than by adding new infrastructure. And that's clearly potentially a much more cost-effective way of getting benefit for the city than by adding a whole new set of infrastructure, which is likely to cost a lot more. So what Bristol City Council has managed to get out of this is the data on which they have made decisions, and they've actually been able to deliver more improvements to the infrastructure by fixing what's already there, as well as adding some new stuff, than by focusing just on new construction. So one of the areas that our platform Commonplace tries to focus is on getting to more people, getting more data so that you can make better decisions. And that's something that digital tools can be particularly good at. And I'll come back to this a couple of times, but we have developed some tools which help our customers to do that better as they go. And here you see some charts which try to do exactly that. So at the top, you can see an engagement chart which shows when people have contributed, what they have contributed as a timeline. And then below that, you can see days of the week that people have contributed and when they've visited and when they've added comments. And this is, useful because it allows you, as you're going through a process of engagement, to focus on the times that people are engaging most and engage more during those times. So from this chart, you can see that Monday and actually Friday, just before the weekend, are quite good times to do your engagements. And you can also see that, you know, early afternoon, sort of 2 o'clock, seems to be the time that resonates most. And finally, down the bottom, you'll see that Facebook is under the referral section. Facebook is the place that we get most people on this project coming from, and that's common across almost all of our projects. And I will talk a little bit more about why that's important in a sec. So the second area I want to talk about is capturing social need. Excuse me. And the opportunity that you have digitally through collecting all of this additional data is to be able to understand to a much deeper degree what the opportunities as well as the challenges are to an area. We worked with Waltham Forest on their Mini Holland scheme, which is a cycling regeneration scheme which has been used across the whole borough of Waltham Forest. And through the whole process, and I will explain a little bit in a sec about how Commonplace work, but through the whole process, they're making changes, and the early indications are showing that the traffic that's in those areas has fallen by a very, very significant proportion, about 56%, which is meaning many fewer vehicles, a much more pleasant environment for people to live in the short term and the much longer term. And the accidents as a result have also fallen. The initial results are showing. One of the benefits of collecting all this data digitally is that you can then analyze the data in lots of different ways. And in Waltham Forest in particular, we found that there were lots of different demographic groups who had different perspectives, different needs, and being able to draw out what those needs are and to be able to illustrate those very simply meant that not only the discussion and the contributions were more meaningful, but also the decision making was easier and clearer. So a really interesting example of this was that the council initially believed that they couldn't make certain changes in certain routes because it would damage the businesses whose frontages were on those routes. But actually, by collecting the data by Commonplace, they found that, for example, a much larger proportion than they thought of people walked or cycled to the local shops rather than drove to the local shops. And so making changes like restricting parking at certain times wasn't going to have the detrimental effect to businesses that they had feared. So moving on to planning, and planning, as you all know, is an extremely risky process. It's one that consumes a huge amount of time, a huge amount of money, and there are all sorts of complicated processes that you have to go through and different challenges to overcome. In particular, the opportunity that we have focused on is reaching the silent majority, the people who it's just very, very difficult to get to through meetings and door knocking and face-to-face conversations. And in particular, these are the so-called millennials, the 25 to 40-year-olds. And as you can see from the chart there, those are the people that we do attract. And back to the point I made about Facebook, part of the reason that we attract those is because we focus on the networks that they're already having the conversations in, which tends to be Facebook. Facebook is a network that is popular with that age group, but it's also a network which is very locally focused. So that there tend to be lots of local discussions. You know, those are sometimes around schools, sometimes around parent groups. But we can get a very large proportion of that age group to participate by being very friendly to those networks. We've got a lot of different examples of how this has helped planning. We've asked several of our customers about whether it reduces the timescale of planning, and they have said that it reduces it by months. So that has financial benefit because, of course, the shorter the timescale that you takes to get to planning, the quicker you can start to get a financial return on your investment. It also helps in situations where there have previously been challenges to planning. We've worked with a number of developers, including Grosvenor, Granger, where there have previously been planning issues, planning challenges, and by getting to this much larger demographic, and in particular the silent majority who are quite often those who are more open to change, we've managed to help them get the message out and get responses which have been much more positive from the community overall. And the chart that you see there is the dashboard chart showing the approval rate for a particular project. So finally, and this comes back to what Martin was saying, the opportunity with all of this, I think, is that by building trust, and that it means by having an open and transparent conversation, you build up a relationship with people. You also build up some data about those people, where they live, what kind of things they're interested in, what things they want. And by doing that, you not only help overcome the immediate hurdles, which might include planning, but you actually build a set of information that can help you to get much better return on your initial investment. And that might be by providing stuff as a PRS business, but equally it might be about how you deliver community services as a social landlord. But if you don't have that information, you're going to find it increasingly difficult to be able to do that effectively. So just as a quick summary, there are obvious financial benefits that we have seen, and I've talked about a few of them. Again, having talked to some of our clients about this, we found that the return on the investment that you can get by doing your community engagement using digital tools, as well as and in combination with the ways that you're doing it already, you can get 10 to 20 times return on the investment. Planning benefits I've just discussed: faster, quicker, easier approvals. Research benefits. So by understanding the needs and what people respond positively to, you get more happy people, and ultimately that helps your business to flourish. And your brand and the way that you communicate with the community is the lifeblood of your business, whether you are private or a public sector, and it's the foundation for long-term engagement. We've got a number of projects, and you can see all of these on our website, from very large scale to quite small scale projects, both in the public and private sector. I don't want to go through any of these in any more detail now, but if you have any questions about any of them, please do ask, and we will, if anybody wants to stay, go through and do a demo afterwards, and we can look at some of these in a bit more detail. So we've talked quite a lot. We'd love to hear your questions and try to answer some of them, and we've got a few already, which is great. So the first one is about promotion. How do we promote Bristol Bugbears, and especially how do we get it to people who don't have access to the internet? So this is a question that we get asked quite regularly, and of course the way that a digital tool works in this context has to be as part of a broader engagement strategy. We typically work very closely with the customer to identify what the existing networks they're working in are. In the case of Bristol, the Bristol Bugbears project, as well as digitally and via Facebook, the City Council ran various pop-up events in different neighbourhoods around the city. They also engaged through various communities of interest. So the cycling community was obviously a key one, and they went to various events that the cycling community were running. And the opportunity to take part in Commonplace was promoted across all of the council's regular communications. So they used their email lists, to send out the opportunity. It was promoted on their website, and they did get a little bit of local media as well. So we have built up a set of resources through the roughly 115 projects that we've run. We know what templates work for emails. We know how to conduct Facebook campaigns within this context that really work, and we provide all of that as part of the business relationship you have with us. We also have an iPad version of the Commonplace tool that can be used at events, and we can spit out paper forms that you can use in situations where it isn't relevant to use digital, and that does crop up. So we try and make it something that we can drop into the way that you're already doing your engagement. So we've got another question, which is about how will the tools overcome consultation fatigue? Martin, have you got thoughts on this?
Yes. I think that we have to, I can't believe there's consultation fatigue. I can't believe no one in the world does anywhere near enough to create fatigue. So I think that is a bit of a non-issue, to be honest. I think that you get over fatigue of anything like that by just making it easier and more engaging. And I think that maybe if somebody has experienced consultation fatigue, it's because the way in which we might traditionally do it doesn't work very well or might put people off. I think you have to make life easy for people if you want them to do you a favor. And if you want them to give you some information, you have to make life easy for them. And I think that tools like this are designed to do exactly that, to embed this two-way consultation into people's normal daily lives and the way that they use their online access.
Thanks. Actually, the other thing I'd add to that is that I think fatigue sometimes comes from people taking part in something, but then feeling that their contribution hasn't been listened to, and so why should they do it again? Frankly, they've done it once or maybe more, and they haven't got anything out of it personally. So I think transparency and openness of communication is really important. Our experience is that if you enable people to have an open conversation, and that means that they can see that their comments are being listened to, and that partly means that they can read other people's comments, so the whole conversation is transparent. They understand that they're being listened to, and they will therefore take a further opportunity to participate if they can see that the things that they've said and things that other people have said are being responded to. So I think it's often about creating a process and a sense of progress, and that doesn't mean necessarily responding to everybody's points individually, but it means responding to the aggregate or the overview ideas and perceptions that people have put forward. So we haven't got any further questions, I don't think, at the moment. If anybody's got anything else they'd like to add, please just chat it on the in that little window you've got in front of it. Put the question and hit post, and we can respond to that. It's 11:35, so I think what we're going to do now is move on to doing a demo of some of the projects, and this will just go through actually in a bit more detail some of the things that we've already talked about. So if you'd like to stay for that, please do. If you're going to leave at this point, thank you very much for joining. We will send you the slides that we've just been through, and if you have further questions that you think about afterwards, please just drop us a line. We're also going to be producing a summary of this in the form of an ebook, which will be available from our website, and we'll email you all when that's available, that you can just go onto the website and download. So I'm just going to switch over to